Well, in our last session, we thought about coronavirus and our own personal response to it. We thought through some of the ways in which we found it hard, some of the dehumanizing impacts of the lockdown that have made us less than God created us to be. And yet we also saw that hard times are opportunities. There are times when God can teach us, and I hope within your groups you had an interesting time exploring the different lessons that people had learned. Just one last follow-up on that issue. It's worth exploring what we can do. You know, there's so much that we can't do at the moment. We can't sing, we can't be relational in the way that we want to be. And yet it's worth exploring, how do we get as close as possible to the way in which God has made us? Okay, I can't do this, but what can I do so that we're just not totally defeatist and pessimistic? But that's a hangover from the last session, because in this session I want to stick with the issue of coronavirus, but ask this question: how do we respond to culture's attitude towards it? Over the last few months, we've probably listened to the government far more than normal, to scientists, and obviously news, media. They've all got opinions on coronavirus. And probably how we respond to that will depend largely on our personality. So for some of us, we're natural conformists. We hear, I don't know, the BBC or the government saying something to us, and we go, yes, that's right. And I don't know, we get very twitchy whenever we see another human being within 2 meters of each other, and so on. And we just absorb stuff and say, yeah, that's right. For others of us, we're natural non-conformists. And so we hear stuff and we kind of dismiss it. Yeah, you know, it's just a bit like the flu and all that sort of stuff. And it seems to me that neither response is right. That the call for us is not simply to react in line with our personalities, but to think biblically about what is going on. And it seems to me that when we think biblically, we will discover that culture's response is mixed. So, because human beings are made in the image of God, and because that's not been completely wiped out, there will be certain ways in which people's instinctive response is healthy. You know, we are concerned when people die. You know, we admire those who serve others. That's positive. Equally though, you also have a sense that God has gone absent. You know, nobody, so far as I know, in any position of authority has mentioned God at any point in this process. And that's deeply problematic. So what I want us to do is to do some reflecting. Here are the questions I'd like us to consider in our groups. What have been the main cultural responses to the pandemic? Yeah, maybe that you want to focus on the sort of clapping on the doorsteps at Thursday at 8 o'clock that happened in the first few months. What have been the main responses, do you think, culturally? And then secondly, what are the values that lie behind that? Why have people responded in that way? And then, having done the sort of diagnostic work, as it were, I want us to take us to the Bible. How does God think we should respond to times like this? And on the screen you'll see a couple of suggestions as to passages where you could go. And then I want to give you an exercise. If you were the Queen, or if you were the Prime Minister, and you had 5 minutes to address the nation, what would you say? Now, I know this will give some of you the opportunity to fulfill a lifetime ambition. You know, you can imagine you were the Queen or the Prime Minister. You got 5 minutes. What would you say? What would be in your talk? Try and engage with what's going on in culture, but it'd be also good if, in the end, people are pointed to the Lord. So, press pause on the video. Feel free to discuss those questions, and then, if you want, you can watch me attempt to give my King's speech. Have a good time in your discussion groups. These have been challenging times for us as a country. And yet in many ways we've seen the best of human beings. Here we think of those who have put themselves at risk in the different jobs that they've done, particularly within the NHS. We've seen the way in which that's been admired and appreciated by people over the last few months. We've seen the way in which people have kept to restrictions at cost to themselves because of a desire to safeguard the health of others. These are wonderful things. And you might wonder where they come from. Why is it that we as human beings care for others? Why is it that we have in this country a sort of history of serving others being regarded as a wonderful thing? I'm deeply thankful that all of us are those who are created by God, that we have a sense of being one humanity because we all have our origins in one creator. That explains why we have that concern for one another. And I'm so thankful that we as a culture are in certain respects still rooted in the example of the Lord Jesus, the one who himself came not to be served but to serve others. And as we see people serving, there is something that in us that admires that. It's part actually of our Christian heritage. But I think it's fair to say that whilst there are many good things that we've seen over the last few months, there have also been challenges for us. And I need to be candid with you. The reality is we cannot stop people dying. Sometimes we've boasted that we can somehow control the virus. Maybe there's been the sort of dark side to us applauding the NHS because we think the NHS can somehow save us from death. But this has been a wake-up call. Indeed, I think it could be argued that maybe we've overreacted to the pandemic. Certainly, if I'm honest, the figures of those dying is significantly less than in previous pandemics, almost because we as a culture can't accept the reality that human beings die. It is actually destined to all of us to face that. And this has been a wake-up call for us as a culture in other ways. For years, we've lived as those who are in control of our destiny. It's been one of our slogans that we've sometimes used, taking back control, as though things are in our hands. And the reality is, we cannot control this. There are no good outcomes. Either people die from the pandemic or tragically will impose restrictions that will cause other people to die often. There is no good way through this. And that's a reminder to us, maybe a wake-up call to us, that we are simply creatures, that we are those who are dependent on God our Maker. And indeed, maybe this is an occasion where we need to turn away from the pride that has said we can control our futures. We know what is going to happen. If we will it hard enough, it will take place. And so I want to say to all of us, this is a time to take stock, to realise our limits, and to realise that for all of us, we are mortal. Death is what awaits us. And so above all else, this is the time to realise we need Jesus. Jesus is the example of one who serves. And as he goes to the cross as that act of service, he sets us free from the fear of death. He goes through death, comes out on the other side, paying for our sin that leads to death. And as we put our hands into his and we trust him, he can get us through death into paradise on the other side. And so, can I urge us, don't just pay attention to the guidelines as though they will save you from death. Actually, there's only one who will ultimately save us from death. This is a time to recognise we are creatures who need Jesus. And if we realise that, this could even be a positive time for all of us in this country. Thanks for listening.